I don't know about you, but watching some of the events of this past week on TV coming out of the Middle East have been disconcerting, to say the least. It's hard to watch the uprising against a nation I love for reasons that, to me, don't make all the way a lot of sense. And then this morning, to wake up when my clock radio went off to 4 more Americans dead because some Pakistani, I believe, Afghan soldier, I think it was actually, who was dressed like a soldier, actually turned against us and killed 4 who thought that guy was actually their friend. It brings up a lot in me, and it's not all edifying. It makes me mad. And in my anger, sometimes I become very painfully aware of that violent reflex in myself that anger creates, this sort of angry reflex. And there are many times in my life I was painfully aware this week where I gave into that, in word or deed, one way or another, to that impulse to violence. It's not an edifying thing. It seems to be pretty natural to most of us human beings. And it's probably exactly what's happening over there. But I get really mad sometimes. The reason I'm wearing this vestment today when it's actually a little cooler, I usually wear this on hot days, is it's from Africa. And I wanted to take you back with me to a couple days that I was privileged to experience when I was in South Africa this past summer. One of the takeaways from that trip was that I had the opportunity to visit the slums of Soweto and to spend some time, a significant amount of time, in the Apartheid Museum in Johannesburg there. And during those days I spent there, something became very clear to me. What became clear to me was that when violence is met with nonviolence, all you can do when you see it, even though 20 years later, is cry. Cry because it's just so beautiful. There's something so beautiful about somebody who's wronged, who doesn't pick up weapons to fight back, but uses other means to resist. There's something so beautiful about that, and something that just seems so right. I don't know how else to explain my tears there that happened frequently, that actually surprised me. But to say that when I read those stories, when I stood in those places, when I spent some time in the Catholic Church just on the edges of Soweto, where they organized this nonviolent resistance, when I stood where hundreds of children were killed in a barrage of bullets, and when I saw the steady and consistent way that so many never fought back, but only kept marching and striking and praying and dying, it moved me to tears because it was just so beautiful, and so beautiful because it was just so right. Perhaps it has something to do with why that cross over there still has the same ability, not 20 years, but 2,000 years later, to move many, many to tears. That cross represents an act of nonviolence in the face of terrifying violence. The first reading from Isaiah is part of what kicked me in the rear end this week. The Lord God opened my ears. He opened my ears because this time I heard. This time I didn't push away or rebel. This time I chose to give my back to those who beat me, my cheeks to those who plucked my beard. My face I did not shield from buffets and spitting. And I am not disgraced. I have set my face like flint, knowing that this is not going to shame me. And when Jesus asks in the same Sunday morning gospel, "Who do you say that I am?" In the light of that first reading, it seems to me that at least a part of our answer has got to be, "You are the nonviolent Messiah. You are the nonviolent one." For he became the one who decided to set his face like flint against his attacker. Notice here, he is not some sort of wimp or weenie just rolling over and playing dead and cowering with his tail between his legs, some whimpering fool. Nonviolence for Jesus was the courageous stance. It was strong of him, powerful. He didn't turn away and run. He stayed. He stayed the course, even when many were encouraging him to fight back or to escape. He did what he needed to do. This is the strong stance, not the weak stance, and powerful indeed. It is resistance against unfairness. It is resistance against cruelty that he showed, and rights deprived, without playing by the rules of the oppressor, without buying into their game, without buying into their dehumanizing ways. This Jesus, this nonviolent Messiah, kept his humanity. He kept his dignity, even when they treated him like trash. And he didn't go hide his gifts when he was hurt, like many of us do when we're hurt. When he was maligned and even tortured. That's the hard part, you know? To stand tall and not cower and set our face like flint before them, knowing that if we make that choice, there's no way they're going to shame us. It's the choice to not fight back. And I think it's about the hardest choice we can ever make. At our kitchen tables, anywhere. To not fight back. And I have to say, for us, especially who are males, this is a very different way of being a man. To see that way lived out in our day is to realize from the outside in how powerful this can be, to live this way. And the sometimes deeper change that can happen when we respond without violence to violence. Martin Luther King did it. Gandhi did it. Jesus did it. And what I came to see in South Africa was the power of that, especially in a man named Nelson Mandela. And part of what blew me away there, in that land that was so divided by apartheid, so divided, the line so clear between what they called the class of blacks and the class of coloreds and the class of whites, is that the power structure turned absolutely upside down, and the whites who had all the power really have none anymore. And even though they have none anymore because there's such a minority there, even though they have none, they heroicize, they respect Nelson Mandela because he saved their country that they love from a bloodbath. They said that to me again and again while I was there. He saved us from a civil war from which we probably never would have recovered. because he offered us another way. To resist, mind you, resist without violence. It was a horrible time for the blacks and the coloreds there. It meant no rights, not voting. It meant being denied much of their human dignity. It meant that, in a sort of a sense, they were legally spit on by a whole class of people. Nonviolent resistance, that is, marked the life of the early followers of Jesus, who lived and died in those first 300 years after him. In his name, as he did it, they lived and they died. And so many saw the courage that mode of resistance took. They saw the courage and the power of living this way, that in the end they were only led to conclude, indeed, that it's true, that the blood of the martyrs those first 300 years became the seed of the church. You and I are sitting here this morning because they responded like they did then. Nelson Mandela had a lot of courage. He was not a perfect man. And as a matter of fact, he did see the place of violence sometimes, but not this time. And to stay that course, he paid the price. And to be able to walk in his shoes a bit those days and see his place on this planet was so moving to me and so confirming that there's something so right, so good about this way. My friends and I rode the ferry he rode to freedom after 27 years in a cell, not much bigger than half of this sanctuary, and the little mat that he slept on there for those 27 years. We visited his home in Soweto, still pocked by bullet holes that would sound in the night. We saw the line on the floor where he built a wall so that the fire bombings and the bullets would not kill his wife and his children. His first wife left him because she couldn't live this way anymore. What he sacrificed for freedom. So many pressured him to give up, to take up arms, to fight back, to begin a war that would have been a bloodbath indeed. Jesus was pressured the same way. Let's fight back. And he said no. They tried to get him to overthrow by violence the occupying force of Rome. And he said, that's not the way. I became, as I said at the very beginning, painfully aware this week again of that violent reflex in myself when I or something I love is wronged. None of us conquer this all the way. But maybe we can just begin, in the light of these words, to see another way that just might even work better. Can we even imagine a world in which our response to somebody who hurts us would be to not fight back with words or punches or guns? How different it would look. I suspected there'd be something really beautiful about it, and so right. One thing for sure, the governments of the world will not even begin to practice nonviolence until the people, that's you and me, till we begin to practice nonviolence ourselves. So questions remain. How do I respond when I'm offended? How do we respond when our safety feels threatened? If Jesus seemed to reject violence, then how do I, as his disciple in 2012, reject violence? I know I perpetuate violence more than I even think. With cruel words, raised voices, mean or dismissive looks, gossip even. How much violence comes into the world because of me? No more. No more. It doesn't work. And it only adds to the ugliness of the world instead of its beauty. There were moments in that museum and in those sacred places that moved me profoundly, where I was surprised by my own tears. But we don't have to go to South Africa to know the power of that. It's right there, on that cross, where violence was met by nonviolence, where we experience this one again who is the nonviolent Messiah. And when you meet it, wherever you meet it, you just can't help but cry. Because there's something just so beautiful about living this way. Between nations, between religions, at your kitchen table. So beautiful.